My brother shoved the envelope across the table and said, "Sign it, or I'll make sure everyone in this room knows exactly why Mom had to work doubles for 20 years. He said it quietly, almost gently, like a man who had practiced the words in the mirror. Then he smiled at the guests 2 tables over, raised his champagne flute, and waited for me to pick up the pen. I didn't pick up the pen. I looked at my hand resting on the white tablecloth, still trembling from when he'd grabbed my wrist in the hallway 5 minutes earlier, hard enough to leave a mark under my sleeve. I looked at the envelope. Then I stood up, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked out of my own brother's wedding reception without saying goodbye to anyone. Before I tell you what happened in the 72 hours after I left that reception, I want to ask you something. Drop it in the comments. What is the moment you realized someone you loved had never actually seen you as a person? I read every single one. I'll start. I sat in my car in the venue parking lot for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the dashboard clock. My wrist throbbed. Outside, through the tall windows, I could see the silhouettes of people dancing. My brother was probably out there on the floor right now, spinning his new wife, laughing with his groomsmen, completely confident I would come back inside and sign. He had always been confident like that. Not the earned confidence of someone who had built something. The borrowed confidence of someone who had never once been told no by the people who were supposed to love them both equally. My name is Sloane. I am 32 years old. I am a senior auditor at a regional accounting firm, which means I spend my days looking at numbers that are supposed to add up and finding the places where someone decided the rules didn't apply to them. I am good at my job. I am, if I'm being honest, very good at it. I drove home. My apartment is small and quiet and entirely mine. I bought it 4 years ago with money I saved while my brother was using our grandmother's basement as a recording studio for a music career that produced exactly one SoundCloud album with 47 listens. I unlocked the door, filled a glass of water, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I needed to understand what, exactly, I had almost signed. The envelope was still in my purse. I hadn't opened it at the table because my brother had slid it to me, folded shut, a move designed to make me sign without reading. I'd recognize the tactic immediately. It's a classic one. You create social pressure, time pressure, and emotional pressure simultaneously, and you count on the target being too flustered to slow down and think. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. I unfolded the document. It was a quitclaim deed, 3 pages. My grandmother had passed away 14 months ago and left her house jointly to me and my brother in equal shares. The house was in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, a modest 3-bedroom that she had paid off completely by 1987 and maintained with the meticulous care of a woman who understood that a house was not an investment, it was a home. Current assessed value was approximately $340,000. The quitclaim deed would transfer my 50% share to my brother for the sum of $1. $1. I sat with that for a moment. Then I turned to page 3 to see the signature line. My signature was already there. I stared at it. I tilted the page under the light. It was a good forgery, not perfect, but good enough to pass a casual glance. The notary stamp beside it was dated 6 weeks ago. I set the document down very carefully. The way you set down a glass you're afraid you might shatter. My brother hadn't been asking me to sign tonight. He had been asking me to ratify something he had already done. The real document, the one with the forged signature and the fraudulent notary stamp, was presumably already somewhere in a filing process. What he'd handed me at the reception was either a duplicate or a trap to get my actual signature on record so the forgery would be harder to challenge. Either way, the house had likely already been listed or sold, and he needed my cooperation to make the paper trail clean. I thought about the phone call I'd gotten 3 weeks ago from a number I didn't recognize. I'd let it go to voicemail. The message had been from someone who said he was a real estate agent and that he wanted to confirm some details about a property transaction. I had assumed it was spam and deleted it. I pulled up the Ohio real estate listings on my laptop and searched my grandmother's address. The listing was there. Active. Listed at $329,000. Listed by a brokerage firm I didn't recognize. Listed 4 weeks ago. The listing description said the property was being sold by the sole heir. Sole heir. My brother had not just forged my signature. He had been representing himself as the only person with ownership rights to that house. He had found a notary, or someone posing as one to fraudulently authenticate my signature, filed paperwork claiming sole inheritance, and listed the property without my knowledge. And based on the listing status, the sale was either already under contract or close to it. I got up and poured the glass of water down the drain. I needed coffee. I needed to think clearly and quickly, because depending on where the sale was in the process, there might be a very narrow window to stop it. Here's the thing about working in financial auditing. You learn very quickly that fraud is rarely sophisticated. The movies make it look like some elaborate chess match between brilliant minds. In reality, most fraud is lazy. It exploits the fact that the people around you trust you, or are too tired to look closely, or assume that someone they love couldn't possibly be doing what they are clearly doing. My brother had counted on all three with me. He had counted on family loyalty clouding my vision, on the complexity of probate law being overwhelming, and on my not checking. He had forgotten that checking is literally what I do for a living. I opened a new spreadsheet and started building the timeline. Grandmother passed 14 months ago. Probate opened 12 months ago. Probate typically takes 6 to 9 months in Ohio for an uncontested estate. The deed should have transferred to both of us approximately 4 to 6 months ago. But I had never received any documentation. I had assumed my brother was handling the administrative process because he lived closer, because he had said he would, because I had been working 60-hour weeks and trusted him. I searched the county auditor's website and pulled up the property transfer records. The deed had been transferred 3 months ago to one name, his, a single filing, his name only. My grandmother's signature, as the deceased previous owner, was handled through the probate estate, and someone, my brother, or whoever was helping him, had submitted documentation claiming I had waived my inheritance rights. I did not waive my inheritance rights. I had never signed anything saying I did, which meant there was a second forged document somewhere, filed with the county, predating even the quitclaim deed he'd tried to get me to sign tonight. This wasn't a moment of desperation. This wasn't my brother panicking after a bad financial decision. This had been a calculated, multi-step process executed over months. The question was, who had helped him? Notary fraud doesn't happen in a vacuum. Someone had either faked those stamps or a real notary had signed off on documents they knew were fraudulent. That was a crime. Filing false documents with a county recorder was a crime. Wire fraud, if he had communicated across state lines in the process of the sale, also a crime. My phone buzzed. It was my mother. I looked at her name on the screen for a long moment. My mother is a good woman in many ways. She worked hard. She showed up. She made sure we had food and school supplies and winter coats. But she had also spent 30 years making every difficult thing my brother did into a story about how hard his life was. When he dropped out of college after one semester, it was because the professors didn't understand his learning style. When he totaled his car at 24, it was because he'd been under too much stress. When he borrowed money from her retirement account and didn't pay it back, she told me not to mention it because it would damage his confidence. I had watched her carry him for 3 decades. What I had failed to understand, until right now, staring at a fraudulent property transfer on a county auditor's website at 11:30 on a Saturday night, was that she had also watched him. She had been in that house when grandmother died. She had been involved in the probate conversations. She might not have known about the forgery, but she had known that the house was being listed without my name on anything, and she had not called me. I let her call go to voicemail. 14 seconds later, a text, "Sloane, where did you go? Your brother is upset. Can you please just come back and deal with this like an adult?" I put my phone face down on the table. There is a specific kind of grief that has no good name. It's not the grief of losing someone. It's the grief of finally seeing someone clearly and realizing that what you loved was a story you told yourself about who they were. My mother wasn't calling to ask if I was okay. My mother wasn't calling to ask why my brother had grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise it in a venue hallway. She was calling because a scene had been caused, and scenes were the thing she feared most, more than injustice. More than her daughter sitting alone in a parking lot, pressing her sleeve against her arm. I turned my phone back over and texted her back, "I'm fine. I need a few days." Then I blocked her number for the night. Not forever. Just for tonight. So I could think. I needed one phone call, and I needed to make it carefully. His name was Daniel. We had worked together briefly at a previous firm before he moved into a position with the Ohio Division of Securities, which sits under the State Attorney General's office. We weren't close friends, but we were the kind of colleagues who had stayed genuinely respectful, who had swapped honest references for each other, who had kept each other's numbers for the day one of them found something that needed to go to the right place. It was past midnight. I texted instead of calling, "I know it's late. I have something I think falls under real estate fraud, and potentially notary fraud, with a forged signature on a probate filing. The property is already listed for sale, and based on what I'm looking at, the seller may not have clear legal title. Is there someone I should call Monday morning, Or is there a way to flag this before a sale closes? I sent it and went to make coffee. My phone rang before the coffee finished brewing. Daniel didn't say hello. He said, "What did you find? And how solid is it?" I told him. All of it. The quitclaim deed, the transfer records, the county filing with my waived inheritance rights that I had never actually waived, the listing with the sole heir description, the voicemail from the real estate agent I deleted 3 weeks ago. I told him about the reception, about the envelope, about my wrist. When I finished, there was a pause. "Sloane," he said, "the fact that a sale is actively listed means there's a potential buyer. If that buyer goes under contract and starts transferring funds, this becomes wire fraud the moment electronic communication crosses state lines. That escalates it." "I know," I said. "Do you have digital access to any of the county filings? Can you screenshot what you're seeing on the public records portal right now?" "Already done," I said. "I have 12 screenshots and I'm building a document. I can send you a package within the hour." He was quiet for a moment. I could hear him thinking. "My contact at the Attorney General's Real Estate Fraud Division owes me a favor," he said. "I'm going to text her tonight. She might not respond until morning, but I want her to have your name before she starts her day. Don't contact the real estate brokerage. Don't contact your brother. Don't do anything that would give them reason to accelerate the sale or move funds." "Understood," I said. "And Sloane, the forgery on the probate filing. Is there any chance someone could argue you verbally agreed to waive your share and this was a documentation error?" I almost laughed. I was never asked. There was no conversation. The first time I saw any paperwork related to that house was tonight when my brother handed me a quitclaim deed at his wedding reception and told me to sign. Another pause. "Okay," Daniel said. "Send me everything." I hit send at 1:47 inches the morning. Then I set my phone down, finished my coffee, and sat with the strange stillness that comes after you've done the thing you cannot take back. I wasn't shaking anymore. The bruise on my wrist had darkened to a deep purple green against my skin, and I pressed my other hand over it, not because it hurt, but because I needed to feel that it was real, that tonight had happened, that I had not imagined years of being the responsible one, the one who didn't ask for anything, the one who handled her own tuition and her own rent and her own life without a safety net, while my brother was handed net after net after net, stitched together from things that belonged to other people. I thought about my grandmother. She had been a small woman who kept her finances in a folder in the second kitchen drawer and balanced her checkbook by hand every Sunday. She had told me once, when I was about 16 and complaining that my brother got a car and I got a gift card, that the world would be fair to me when I made it fair for myself. I had thought she was being dismissive. I understood now that she was being accurate. She had left me that house because she knew, on some level, that it was the one thing no one could talk me out of before she was gone. I did not let myself cry. I saved it for later. I had work to do. The call from Daniel's contact came at 8:14 Sunday morning. Her name was Priya, and she had the specific energy of someone who had seen every version of this kind of case and was neither surprised nor bored. She asked me to walk her through the timeline again, and she listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "The fraudulent probate filing is my jurisdiction. The notary fraud is also mine. If the sale is under contract, that's where federal wire fraud could come in. And I have a contact at the FBI field office in Columbus for exactly that scenario. Is there a way to stop the sale from closing?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "If we can get a temporary restraining order on the title transfer, the title company is legally obligated to halt closing. That takes 24 to 48 hours on an emergency filing, provided the judge agrees there's sufficient cause. Based on what you've sent, Daniel, I think we have more than sufficient cause. What do I need to do? Be available by phone all day today. Don't tip off your brother. And send me everything you sent, Daniel, plus anything else you have, any texts, voicemails, anything from tonight." I forwarded her the photo I'd taken of my bruised wrist. I didn't explain it. She didn't ask me to. I spent the rest of Sunday doing 3 things: compiling documentation into a single, organized folder with a clear index, rereading the original probate documents I'd been sent during the estate process to identify exactly where the fraudulent waiver had been inserted, and eating a full breakfast because I had not eaten at the reception and I needed to be functional. My brother called twice. I let both go to voicemail. The first message was casual, almost amused, asking me to call him back when I got a chance. The second was cooler, more careful, asking me to confirm that I'd received the document he'd shared at the reception. I did not call back. I texted Daniel and Priya both to let them know my brother was attempting to confirm receipt, which suggested he was aware the timeline was sensitive. Priya responded, "Noted. TRO motion is being drafted. We are moving." The call I hadn't prepared myself for came Monday morning. My mother. I'd unblocked her the night before, and she had clearly spent the time since Saturday planning what she wanted to say, because she didn't start with questions. She started with a speech. She told me my brother was devastated that I had left his reception. She told me the family was embarrassed. She told me he had worked very hard to put together that event, and I had made it about myself. She told me that whatever problem I had with the house situation, there was a right way and a wrong way to handle it, and running out without speaking to anyone was the wrong way. I sat with the phone against my ear and let her finish. When she was done, I said, "Mom, did you know that my signature was forged on a probate document?" Silence. "Did you know the house was transferred to his name only? That it's been listed for sale for 4 weeks without my knowledge?" More silence. And then, "Sloane, you were so busy. He was just trying to simplify things. The plan was always to give you your share of the sale proceeds when." "When?" I said. She didn't answer. "Mom," I said, "when exactly was the plan to tell me that a house I co-owned had been sold?" Her voice, when it came back, had shifted. It was quieter. "He said you had agreed to let him handle it." "I never agreed to anything." There was no conversation. "He forged my signature on a legal document and filed it with the county. That is not simplifying things. That is a crime." She started crying. My mother cries in a very specific way when she's been caught in something, not the crying of remorse, but the crying of someone who believed if she kept the peace long enough, everyone would eventually pretend the peace had always been real. "You're not going to do anything drastic," she said. "Please, he just got married. His wife doesn't know anything about this. Please don't ruin his life over a house." I thought about my grandmother's kitchen drawer, the folder with the checkbook records, the careful Sunday ritual of a woman making sure everything added up. "I'm not ruining his life," I said. "He made the choices that are going to ruin his life. I'm just making sure those choices have consequences." I hung up. I did not block her this time. I just set my phone down and went back to my laptop. "Tuesday afternoon," Priya called. The temporary restraining order had been granted. The title company had been served, and the closing, which had been scheduled for Thursday, was halted. The real estate brokerage had been contacted, and the listing had been flagged. The fraudulent probate filing had been formally identified, and a criminal referral was in process. "There's more," she said. The notary stamp on the forged document had been traced to a notary who had reported her stamp stolen 8 months ago, meaning my brother had either stolen or purchased a stolen notary seal, which elevated the charge significantly. And the buyer under contract for the house had been communicating with my brother via email to finalize the sale, which meant there was a paper trail of him representing himself as the sole owner in interstate electronic communications. Wire fraud. Federal jurisdiction. Priya's FBI contact had opened a file. "What happens now?" I asked. "He'll likely be contacted for an interview," she said, "depending on whether he cooperates or attempts to explain the forged signature as a misunderstanding. This could resolve quickly, or it could become a much longer process. I want to be straightforward with you. The criminal process has its own timeline, but your property rights are protected. The TRO ensures the house cannot be sold. You will need to work with a probate attorney to have the fraudulent transfer reversed, which is a civil process. But given the criminal referral, it should be relatively straightforward." I thanked her. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after we hung up. I thought about every time I had talked myself out of noticing. The borrowed $20 that became $200 that became never mentioned again. The family vacation I hadn't been invited to because it was just the 4 of us, and I had not counted as part of the 4. The college graduation party they'd thrown for him and the card they'd mailed me. I had spent years building explanations for all of it. He's going through something. They have a complicated relationship with me. It's not worth fighting over. I had made myself smaller and smaller in that family to avoid being the difficult one, and they had filled the space I vacated with more of him, until there was no space left for me to stand in. And then they had come for the last thing my grandmother tried to leave me. That was the part I couldn't make small enough. That was the part where I stopped explaining. My brother called me on Thursday, the day the closing would have happened. I answered. He didn't start with an apology. He started by telling me that what had happened was a misunderstanding, that he had meant to talk to me about the house months ago, that things had gotten complicated with the wedding planning, that he had fully intended to split the proceeds with me, that I needed to understand he was under enormous financial pressure. "I know you're under financial pressure," I said. "I've seen the numbers." A pause. "What numbers?" "During the process of building the documentation package, I had requested copies of all probate-related filings through the county, which were public record. In those documents, there were references to an affidavit of debts my brother had filed, claiming the estate had outstanding obligations that justified him managing the asset sale. The debts he had listed were, in part, personal debts he had incurred in his own name that had nothing to do with my grandmother's estate. He had tried to use the estate process to help pay down his own financial problems. You used the estate to cover personal debt, I said. You filed an affidavit listing obligations that weren't the estate's obligations. And when that wasn't going to be enough, you forged my signature to take my half of the property entirely. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, Sloane, come on, we're family. That phrase again, we're family. The magic words, deployed like a fire extinguisher the moment any consequence came near. We're family, so the rules don't apply. We're family, so you absorb the cost. We're family, so you pick up the pen. Yes, I said, we are, which is why I'm telling you directly. A criminal referral has been filed. You should get an attorney. I hung up. I sat back in my chair and looked at my wrist. The bruise had faded to yellow at the edges. I thought about my grandmother one more time. The folder in the second kitchen drawer. The Sunday checkbook ritual. Her voice telling 16-year-old me that the world would be fair when I made it fair for myself. I had taken a job I was good at. I had saved my own money. I had bought my own apartment. I had spent years trying not to take up too much space in a family that had never saved any for me. And when the last gift she tried to give me had been taken by the same hands that had taken everything else, I had not screamed. I had not performed. I had opened a spreadsheet and built the case the same way I built every case carefully, completely, without shortcuts. I was not the villain in my brother's story. I was the auditor in my own. The house did not sell. 3 months later, after the fraudulent probate transfer was voided and the proper co-ownership was restored on the title, my brother and I negotiated a buyout through our respective attorneys. He paid me for my half using money he had to borrow from his new in-laws, which was a conversation I was not present for and do not know the details of, but which I imagine was not easy. I deposited the check. I did not call to gloat. I did not send a text. There was nothing to say that the numbers hadn't already said. My mother and I have a different relationship now, smaller, carefully bounded. She calls on birthdays and I answer. We talk about surface things. She has not apologized for the phone call in which she asked me not to ruin his life over a house. I have not asked her to. Some things calcify when you wait too long, and what's on the other side of them isn't resolution. It's just the shape of what's left. The criminal case is ongoing. I don't talk about it. My attorney talks about it. What I can tell you is this. The morning after I sent that documentation package at 1:47 a.m., I slept better than I had in years. Not because anything was fixed yet. Nothing was fixed yet. But because for the first time in my adult life, I had stopped managing my family's comfort at the expense of my own life. That's not revenge. Revenge would require me to still be invested in their story. What I did was something quieter than revenge and more permanent. I stopped writing myself out of my own. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping what's yours, drop worth it in the comments. Because it is. Share this if someone you know needed to hear it today.